He stood in the courtroom wearing a faded jacket with a single medal pinned to his chest, a silver star, the nation's third highest military honor. The judge glanced at it and laughed. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. The entire courtroom snickered as if he'd walked in wearing a costume. They thought it was fake, a desperate prop from a struggling single father trying to gain sympathy. But what they didn't know was that the medal was real. And so was the story behind it. What they couldn't have predicted was who would walk through those courtroom doors in the next hour, someone whose presence would turn their mockery into stunned silence and transform one judge's contempt into something she never expected to feel. This is the story of a man who didn't need to defend his honor because his honor defended itself. And a woman who learned what true valor really means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The courtroom felt smaller than it should have been. Not physically. The vaulted ceilings of courtroom 4A in the Ashford County Courthouse stretched high overhead, crowned with ornate molding from another era when justice was built to inspire awe. But emotionally, spiritually, the room had shrunk the moment Michael Miller walked through the double doors. He wore no suit, no tie, just a pair of clean jeans, scuffed work boots that had seen too many long shifts, and a canvas jacket the color of desert sand, frayed at the cuffs and collar. Pinned carefully to the left breast pocket was a single medal, a silver star, its blue ribbon slightly faded. The silver itself dulled by time, but unmistakable in shape and meaning. Michael walked alone. No lawyer at his side. No family in the gallery. Just him, a worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. And the kind of posture that came from years of standing at attention, even when the world told you to sit down. He moved to the defendant's table, set the bag down quietly, and folded his hands in front of him. His face was calm, weathered in a way that suggested he'd seen things most people only read about. His hair was cut short, streaks of gray beginning to show at the temples. His eyes, a pale blue, scanned the room once, not with fear, but with the kind of situational awareness that never quite leaves a soldier. Behind him, the gallery buzzed with quiet chatter. A few older women whispered behind their hands. A man in a business suit checked his phone. A teenager in the back row chewed gum loudly, clearly dragged there by a parent for some lesson in civic duty. And then she entered. Judge Nadira Queleth. The room fell silent as her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. She was in her late 30s, striking in a way that demanded attention. Not because of beauty alone, though she had that, but because of presence. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun, her jawline sharp, her dark eyes intelligent and unforgiving. She wore her black robe like armor, and when she ascended to the bench, it was with the confidence of someone who had never lost control of her courtroom. She settled into her chair, adjusted her microphone, and glanced down at the file in front of her. Her eyes flicked up briefly to Michael, then back down. No acknowledgement. No nod. Just a passing glance, as if you were furniture. The bailiff stood. All rise. The Honorable Judge Nadira Queleth presiding. Court is now in session. Everyone sat. Judge Queleth opened the file with a soft rustle of paper. Her voice was smooth, practiced, efficient. Case number 7824. State of Oregon versus Michael James Miller. Charges include failure to appear for a previous hearing, contempt of court, and unlawful possession of a firearm. Michael didn't flinch. He simply nodded once. The judge's eyes lifted from the page and landed on him again, this time with more scrutiny. Her gaze drifted slowly down to the medal on his chest. For a moment, her expression didn't change. Then, just barely, the corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile. A smirk. She leaned back in her chair and folded her arms. "Mr. Miller," she said, her tone dripping with something between amusement and condescension. "I see you've chosen to represent yourself." "Yes, Your Honor," Michael replied. His voice was low, steady, the kind that didn't need volume to carry weight. "And you've also chosen to wear a costume to court." A ripple of laughter spread through the gallery. Michael's brow furrowed slightly. "Excuse me, Your Honor." Judge Queleth gestured lazily toward his chest. "The medal." "The Silver Star, is it?" "Third highest military honor, if I remember correctly from my high school history class." "Yes, Your Honor, it is." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "And you expect this court to believe that you, a man accused of contempt and illegal firearm possession, actually earned that medal?" The room went quiet. Even the gum-chewing teenager stopped mid-chew. Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I don't expect anything, Your Honor. It's a fact." Judge Queleth let out a short, sharp laugh. "A fact, right. And I suppose you just happened to pin it on today for good luck?" "I wear it," Michael said slowly, "because it reminds me of what I'm supposed to stand for." "Uh-huh." She leaned forward now, elbows on the bench, fingers steepled. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Miller. I see a man who missed a court date. A man who was found with an unregistered firearm in his vehicle. A man who thinks that showing up here with a piece of costume jewelry is going to win him sympathy points." "It's not jewelry," Michael said, his voice still even. "It's a commendation for valor." "Valor," she repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. "You know what I think, Mr. Miller? I think you bought that at a surplus store for $20. I think you're trying to manipulate this court by playing dress-up as a hero." The prosecutor, a wiry man in his 40s named Gerald Hicks, barely suppressed a grin. He shuffled his papers loudly, clearly enjoying the show. Michael's hands, which had been resting calmly on the table, curled slightly into fists. Not from anger, but from restraint. He took a slow breath, then spoke. "Your Honor, with respect, I earned this medal in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. In 2011, I can provide documentation if necessary." Judge Queleth waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I'm sure you can find something online. People forge documents all the time. It's called the Internet, Mr. Miller. Welcome to the 21st century." More laughter from the gallery. Louder this time, Michael's eyes closed for just a second. When they opened again, they were still calm, but there was something else there now. Something quiet and unshakable. "I understand you don't believe me," he said softly. "But that doesn't change what happened." Judge Queleth leaned back again, clearly satisfied with herself. "What I believe, Mr. Miller, is that you're wasting this court's time. Now let's move on to the actual charges, shall we?" She turned to the prosecutor. "Mr. Hicks, you may proceed." Gerald Hicks stood, buttoning his blazer with theatrical precision. "Thank you, Your Honor. The state will show that on the evening of April 14th, the defendant failed to appear for a mandatory hearing related to a prior traffic violation. Additionally, during a routine stop 2 weeks later, officers discovered an unregistered firearm in his vehicle. Mr. Miller has no permit, no explanation, and no respect for the law." He glanced at Michael with thinly veiled disdain. "And now he shows up here wearing what appears to be a prop, hoping to distract from the facts." Judge Queleth nodded. "Noted, Mr. Miller. How do you plead?" Michael stood slowly. "Not guilty, Your Honor." "Of course you do," she muttered, scribbling something on her notepad. "Bail is set at $5,000. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for the courtroom doors opened, not a quiet creak. A full, deliberate push. The kind that made everyone turn their heads, and in walked someone no one expected. The man who entered wasn't tall, but he moved like someone used to being followed. His suit was dark gray, perfectly tailored, and his shoes gleamed even under the dull fluorescent courtroom lights. His hair was silver, combed back neatly, and his face carried the kind of lines that came from decades of high-stakes decisions. He wore no insignia, no name tag, but the two uniformed officers flanking him on either side made it clear. This was not an ordinary visitor. Behind him, a woman in a crisp Navy service uniform stepped through, holding a leather briefcase. Her expression was neutral, professional, but her eyes scanned the room with the precision of someone trained to assess threats in seconds. The room fell into stunned silence. Judge Queleth looked up from her notes, irritation flashing across her face. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "This is a closed proceeding. You can't just—" The man raised a hand, calm but commanding. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption. My name is William Traverse. I'm here on official business." Gerald Hicks stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I object to this disruption." "We're in the middle of—" "I'm aware," Traverse said, his voice even but carrying a weight that silenced the prosecutor mid-sentence. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim black wallet. He opened it and held it up toward the bench. Judge Queleth squinted, leaned forward. And then her face went pale. The credentials read, "William Traverse, Deputy Undersecretary, Department of Defense." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She glanced at the bailiff, then back at Traverse. "I don't understand. What does the Department of Defense have to do with a local court proceeding?" "Court proceeding." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Traverse stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "It has everything to do with it, Your Honor. When the man standing at that table is being publicly humiliated for wearing a medal he earned with blood." The room erupted in whispers. Heads turned toward Michael, who stood frozen, his expression unreadable. Judge Queleth's face flushed. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. This man has provided no verification." "No. That's because you didn't ask." Traverse interrupted, his tone still polite but edged with steel. "You assumed. You mocked. And now, with your permission, I'd like to correct the record." Judge Queleth opened her mouth, then hesitated. She glanced down at her file, then back at Traverse. Her confidence, so solid moments before, had begun to crack. "Very well," she said slowly. "But make it quick." Traverse nodded and turned toward the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is William Traverse, and I serve as Deputy Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness at the Department of Defense. I've spent the last 30 years ensuring that the men and women who serve this country are recognized, protected, and honored." He gestured toward Michael. "The man you see before you, Michael James Miller, is a decorated combat veteran. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the United States Marine Corps. On November 9, 2011, during a firefight in Helmand Province, Sergeant Miller's unit was ambushed by insurgent forces. 3 Marines were pinned down under heavy fire. Sergeant Miller, under direct enemy engagement, ran across 200 meters of open ground, dragged 2 wounded Marines to safety, and returned a third time to recover the body of a fallen brother. The room was silent now. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just silence. Traverse continued, his voice steady but filled with quiet reverence. He sustained shrapnel wounds to his leg and shoulder. He was bleeding. He was under fire. And he didn't stop until every Marine was accounted for. For that action, he was awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat. He turned to Judge Queleth. "The medal he wears is not a prop, Your Honor. It is a testament to sacrifice. And the fact that he was mocked for it in this courtroom is frankly a disgrace." Judge Queleth's face had gone from pale to crimson. She gripped the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "You didn't ask," Traverse replied, his tone softening just slightly. "And that, Your Honor, is the problem." He turned back to the gallery. "Sergeant Miller didn't come here today seeking sympathy. He didn't come here to make excuses. He came here because he was summoned by law, and he honored that summons, just as he's honored every commitment he's ever made. The woman in the Navy uniform stepped forward and handed Traverse a folder. He opened it and walked toward the bench, placing it in front of Judge Queloff. Inside, you'll find Sergeant Miller's DD 214, his service record, and the official citation for his Silver Star, all verified, all authenticated. Judge Queloff stared down at the folder but didn't open it. Her hands trembled slightly. Traverse stepped back. Now, as for the charges against him. Gerald Hicks stood quickly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The Department of Defense has no jurisdiction over. I'm not here to interfere with your jurisdiction. Mr. Hicks, Traverse said calmly. I'm here to provide context. Sergeant Miller missed his court date because he was attending a mandatory veterans counseling session at the VA hospital in Portland. That session was scheduled months in advance, and he notified this court via email 2 weeks prior. Hicks blinked. I never received. Your office did, Traverse interrupted. He nodded to the woman in uniform, who stepped forward and handed Hicks a printed email. Confirmation of receipt is included. Hicks scanned the document, his face going slack. Traverse turned back to the bench. As for the firearm, Sergeant Miller does, in fact, have a permit. It was issued by the state of Oregon and is valid through 2026. The officer who stopped him failed to run the updated database, which had recently been transferred to a new system. The firearm was legally registered. Judge Queloff looked like she'd been struck by lightning. She stared at Michael, then at Traverse, then back at the folder in front of her. I need a moment, she said quietly. Take all the time you need, Traverse replied. He walked over to Michael and extended his hand. Michael, still standing stiffly, hesitated for just a moment before shaking it. Proud to know you, Sergeant, Traverse said quietly. Michael nodded, his throat tight. Thank you, sir. Traverse turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I trust you'll review the materials provided and adjust the record accordingly. If you need anything further, my contact information is in that folder. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked toward the exit, the 2 officers and the Navy officer following behind him. The doors closed softly behind them, and the room remained frozen in stunned silence. Judge Queloff sat motionless, staring down at the folder. Her hands, which had been so confident moments before, now rested limply on the bench. She finally looked up at Michael, and for the first time, there was no mockery in her eyes. Only something else. Something that looked a lot like shame. Judge Nadira Queloff sat frozen behind the bench, staring at the folder William Traverse had left behind. The courtroom remained deathly silent, as if everyone was waiting for her to speak, to move, to do anything that might restore the order she'd lost the moment that door had opened. But she didn't move. Not yet. Her fingers finally reached for the folder, trembling slightly as she lifted the cover. Inside was a neatly organized stack of documents, a DD 214 discharge form, a service record, a photograph of Michael Miller in full dress uniform, and at the very top, a single page with an official Department of Defense seal. Citation for the Silver Star. She read it slowly, silently, her eyes moving line by line. The words were formal, clinical, but the actions they described were anything but. Sergeant Michael J. Miller distinguished himself by exceptionally valorous actions on the 9th of November 2011, while serving as squad leader, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. During a coordinated enemy ambush, Sergeant Miller displayed extraordinary courage under fire by exposing himself to intense hostile fire to rescue 3 wounded Marines. Despite sustaining injuries, he refused medical evacuation until all personnel were accounted for. His selfless actions and unwavering dedication to his fellow Marines reflect great credit upon himself and uphold the highest traditions of the Marine Corps, and the United States Naval Service. Judge Queleth closed the folder slowly. Her jaw tightened. She looked up at Michael, who stood at the defendant's table with the same quiet composure he'd held since the moment he walked in. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Gerald Hicks cleared his throat loudly. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, rising from his seat. "While I appreciate the dramatic entrance from the Department of Defense, I'd like to remind the court that we still have charges to address. Regardless of Mr. Miller's service record, the law applies to everyone equally." Judge Queleth blinked as if pulled from a trance. She straightened in her chair, her professional mask sliding back into place, though it fit less comfortably now. "You're right, Mr. Hicks. Proceed." Hicks nodded, smoothing down his tie as he approached the center of the courtroom. He turned to face the small gallery, then back to the bench. "Your Honor, while we all respect Sergeant Miller's service, and I want to make that very clear, we cannot allow that service to overshadow the facts of this case." He began pacing slowly, deliberately. On April 14th, Michael Miller failed to appear in court as required by law. On April 28th, he was found in possession of a firearm during a routine traffic stop. Those are the facts. Those are the charges. He stopped and turned toward Michael. "Now Mr. Traverse provided some explanations, and I'm willing to examine them. But explanations are not the same as exoneration. A missed email does not erase a missed court date. A permit that wasn't immediately verified does not change the fact that the officer at the scene had reasonable cause to detain Mr. Miller." Judge Queleth nodded slowly. "Go on." Hicks walked to his table and picked up a manila folder. "I'd like to call Officer Raymond Booker to the stand." The bailiff opened the side door, and in walked a uniformed police officer in his mid-30s. He was stocky, clean-shaven, with a rigid posture and the kind of face that looked like it rarely smiled. He took the stand and was sworn in. Hicks approached him with a practiced ease. "Officer Booker, can you please tell the court what happened on the evening of April 28th? Officer Booker nodded. "Yes, sir. I was on patrol near the intersection of Oak Street and Hamilton Avenue when I observed a vehicle with a broken taillight. I initiated a traffic stop. The driver was Mr. Miller, and what happened next? I approached the vehicle and asked for his license and registration. He complied. While he was retrieving his documents, I observed a firearm case in the back seat, partially visible under a jacket." Hicks nodded. "And what did you do?" Nodded. "And what did you do?" "I asked Mr. Miller to step out of the vehicle. I asked if he had a permit for the firearm. He said he did, but he couldn't locate it at that moment. I ran his information through our system, and no active permit came up. Standard protocol at that point is to secure the firearm and detain the individual for further verification." "Did Mr. Miller resist?" "No, sir, he was cooperative. But he did seem agitated." Hicks turned to the judge. "Your Honor, while Mr. Miller may have had a permit, the officer had no way of knowing that at the time. The system showed no record. Officer Booker acted appropriately." Judge Queleth glanced at Michael, then back at Hicks. "Noted." Hicks returned to his seat. "Your witness, Mr. Miller." Michael stood slowly. "He didn't grab any papers. He didn't consult notes. He simply walked toward Officer Booker with the same calm, measured steps he'd used since entering the courtroom. "Officer Booker," Michael began, his voice quiet but clear. "You said you pulled me over for a broken taillight." "That's correct." "And you said you observed the firearm case in the backseat, partially visible under a jacket." "Yes," Michael nodded. "How far into the back seat?" Booker hesitated. "I'm sorry. How far back was the case? Was it on the seat or was it on the floor?" "It was on the seat, I believe." "You believe or you know?" Booker shifted slightly. "It was on the seat." Michael took a step closer. "And you said it was partially visible under a jacket. Which part was visible?" The corner of the case. So you saw a corner of a black case under a jacket and immediately assumed it was a firearm. Hicks stood. Objection. He's badgering the witness. Judge Queleth hesitated, then said, overruled. Answer the question, officer. Booker cleared his throat. I recognized it as a firearm case based on my training and experience. Michael nodded slowly. I see. And when you ran my information through the system, you said no permit came up. That's correct. Did you run it through the state database or the national one? Booker paused. I ran it through the system we use. Which system is that? The state system. Michael walked to the defendant's table and picked up a single sheet of paper. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Officer Booker. This is a copy of my permit, issued by the state of Oregon. The permit number is clearly listed. Did you enter that number into the system? Booker looked at the paper, then back at Michael. I entered your name and date of birth, but not the permit number. No. Michael let that hang in the air for a moment. So it's possible that the system didn't have updated records, or that the search parameters were incomplete. It's possible, Booker admitted reluctantly. Michael took the paper back. Thank you, officer. No further questions. As Michael returned to his seat, Judge Queleth's expression had shifted again. The smugness was gone. The condescension had evaporated. In its place was something more complicated. Something that looked like the slow, uncomfortable realization that she had been wrong. Hicks stood quickly. Your Honor, even if the permit issue is clarified, we still have the matter of the missed court date. Judge Queleth nodded, but her voice was quieter now. We'll address that next. She glanced at Michael one more time, and this time, when their eyes met, she didn't look away. Judge Nadira Queleth took a slow breath and straightened the papers in front of her. The courtroom had shifted somehow, the air thicker, the gallery more attentive. Even Gerald Hicks seemed less confident now, his earlier swagger replaced by a kind of cautious professionalism. She cleared her throat. Mr. Hicks, you mentioned the missed court date. I'd like to address that now. Hicks stood, buttoning his jacket. Yes, Your Honor. On April 14th, Mr. Miller was scheduled to appear for a hearing related to a prior traffic violation. He failed to appear. No call, no communication, nothing. The court issued a bench warrant as a result. Judge Queleth turned to Michael. Mr. Miller, what is your explanation? Michael rose slowly. Your Honor, I sent an email to the court clerk's office on March 30th, 2 weeks before the scheduled hearing. I explained that I had a mandatory appointment at the VA hospital in Portland that same day. I requested a reschedule and provided documentation. Hicks interjected quickly. Your Honor, we have no record of such an email. Michael reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a thin folder. He opened it and removed a printed email. This is a copy of the email I sent, along with the automatic reply I received, confirming it was delivered to the court's general inbox. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. Judge. Queleth put on her reading glasses and scanned the document. Her brow furrowed. She read it once, then again. Then she looked up at Hicks. Mr. Hicks, this email is addressed to the correct office and includes a read receipt timestamp. Hicks stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, if I may. OUR office transitioned to a new email system in late March. It's possible that some messages were lost in the migration. Possible, Judge Queleth repeated, her tone flat. So you're telling me that the court's technical failure resulted in a bench warrant being issued against a veteran who followed proper procedure? Hicks opened his mouth, but no words came out. Judge Queleth turned back to Michael. Mr. Miller, you said you had a mandatory VA appointment. Can you provide documentation of that as well? Michael nodded and pulled another sheet from his folder. Yes, Your Honor. This is the appointment confirmation from the Portland VA Medical Center. It was scheduled for April 14th at 10 a.m. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. in Ashford, which is a 2-hour drive. I couldn't make both. He handed the document over. Judge Queleth examined it closely, then set it down beside the email. She looked at Hicks. Mr. Hicks, do you have any evidence that contradicts what Mr. Miller has presented? Hicks shifted his weight. No, Your Honor, but the fact remains that he didn't appear. Because he notified the court in advance, Judge Queleth said, her voice sharper now. And the court failed to process that notification. Hicks said nothing. Judge Queleth leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. She glanced at Michael, then at the medal still pinned to his chest. Her expression softened, just slightly. Mr. Miller, what was the nature of your VA appointment, if you don't mind my asking? Michael hesitated. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, a flicker of something, pain, maybe, or reluctance, passed across his face. It was a counseling session, Your Honor. For PTSD. The room went silent. Judge Queleth's drumming fingers stopped. She stared at him for a long moment, and something in her eyes changed. Not pity, but recognition, understanding. How long have you been receiving treatment? She asked quietly. 3 years, Michael said, since I came home. She nodded slowly, then turned to Hicks. Mr. Hicks, given the documentation provided and the circumstances involved, does the state wish to continue pursuing the charge of failure to appear? Hicks looked down at his notes, then back up. He exhaled. No, Your Honor. In light of the evidence, the state is willing to drop that charge. A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Judge Queleth made a note on her pad. Motion granted. The charge of failure to appear is dismissed. Michael's shoulders relaxed just a fraction, but Judge Queleth wasn't finished. She looked back at him, her gaze steady. Mr. Miller, I owe you an apology. The room went still again. She set her pen down and folded her hands on the bench. When you walked into this courtroom, I made assumptions. I saw a man in casual clothes with a medal on his chest, and I didn't take the time to ask questions. I didn't give you the respect you deserved, and for that, I am truly sorry. Michael stood silent for a moment, then nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Queleth's throat tightened. She had presided over hundreds of cases, handed down countless rulings, and prided herself on being fair, impartial, tough but just. But in this moment, she realized she had failed. Not because of the law, but because of her own prejudice. She cleared her throat. This court will take a 15-minute recess. When we return, we'll address the firearm charge and move toward a resolution. She stood, and the bailiff called out, All rise. As the judge exited through the door behind the bench, she paused just out of sight, leaning against the wall of her chambers. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath. She had mocked a hero. Back in the courtroom, Michael sat down slowly. A few people in the gallery leaned forward, whispering to each other. One older man in a navy cap gave Michael a small nod of respect. A woman in the second row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Gerald Hicks gathered his files in silence, his earlier confidence completely gone. He glanced at Michael once, then looked away quickly. After a few moments, a young woman approached the defendant's table. She was in her early 20s, dressed in jeans and a university hoodie. Excuse me, she said softly. Michael looked up. I just wanted to say thank you, she said, for your service. My brother was in the army. He didn't make it home. Michael's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss. She nodded, her eyes glistening. He would have liked you. She walked away before Michael could respond. Another person approached, then another. One by one, people from the gallery came forward, offering quiet words of gratitude, respect, and apology. Not everyone. Some still sat in silence, unsure of what to think, but enough that it mattered. Michael accepted each comment with a simple nod, never saying much, just listening. When the bailiff announced that court would resume in 5 minutes, the small crowd dispersed. Michael sat alone again, but the air around him had changed. He was no longer the man being mocked. He was the man being seen. And somewhere in her chambers, Judge Nadira Queleth stared at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She had always prided herself on being strong, decisive, unshakable. But today, she had been humbled, not by the law, by the truth. She straightened her robe, took one more breath, and walked back toward the courtroom. When she sat down at the bench again, her eyes found Michael immediately, and this time, when she looked at him, there was no judgment. Only respect. Judge Queleth settled back into her chair, her composure restored but her confidence tempered. The 15-minute recess had done little to ease the tension in the room. If anything, it had thickened it. Everyone knew something had shifted, but no one was quite sure where it would land. She glanced at her notes, then at Michael. "Mr. Miller, we've addressed 2 of the 3 charges against you. What remains is the matter of the firearm. Mr. Hicks, you may proceed." Gerald Hicks stood, though his movements were slower now, more careful. "Thank you, Your Honor. While the permit issue has been partially clarified, I'd like to revisit the circumstances of the stop itself." He walked toward the center of the room. Officer Booker acted on reasonable suspicion. He saw what appeared to be a weapon, and when the initial database check came back negative, he followed protocol. The question isn't whether Mr. Miller had a permit. It's whether the officer had cause to detain him in that moment. Judge Queleth nodded. "That's a fair point, Mr. Miller. Do you dispute that Officer Booker acted within his authority?" Michael stood. "No, Your Honor, I don't dispute that he was doing his job. But I do think there's more to the story." Hicks raised an eyebrow. "More to the story?" Michael looked at Officer Booker, who was still seated near the witness stand. "Officer Booker, when you pulled me over, you said I seemed agitated. Is that correct?" Booker nodded. "Yes. Did I raise my voice?" "No. Did I make any threatening gestures?" "No. So what made you think I was agitated?" Booker hesitated. "You seemed tense, nervous." Michael nodded slowly. "I was nervous. Do you know why?" Booker shook his head. Michael took a breath. "Because 3 months before that stop, I was pulled over by a different officer in a different town. That officer approached my vehicle with his weapon drawn. He ordered me out of the car, made me kneel on the side of the road, and searched my vehicle without explanation. When I asked why, he told me I matched the description of a suspect. I didn't. I was released after 20 minutes, but no apology was given. No explanation. The courtroom was silent. Michael continued, his voice steady but edged with something raw. "So yes, Officer Booker, I was nervous. Because every time I see flashing lights, I don't know if I'm about to be treated like a citizen or a suspect." Judge Queleth's pen had stopped moving. She was staring at Michael now, fully focused. Hicks shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, while I sympathize with Mr. Miller's experience, it doesn't change the facts of this case." "It changes the context," Michael said, turning to face the prosecutor. "You want to talk about reasonable suspicion? Let's talk about it." Officer Booker saw a corner of a black case and assumed it was a firearm. He didn't ask. He didn't confirm. He assumed. And because of that assumption, I was detained, my vehicle was searched, and I was issued a citation. He turned back to Judge Queleth. "I'm not saying Officer Booker is a bad person. I'm saying the system he works in makes assumptions that don't always hold up." Hicks stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is turning into a referendum on law enforcement, and that's not what we're here for." Judge Queleth held up a hand. "Mr. Hicks, I'll decide what we're here for. Mr. Miller, continue." Michael nodded. "Your Honor, I have a daughter. She's 9 years old. Her name is Lily. She's smart, funny, and she loves science. She wants to be an astronaut." He paused, and for the first time, his voice wavered just slightly. "Every night before bed, she asks me if I'm okay. Not because I tell her I'm not, but because she sees it. She sees the way I check the locks twice. The way I wake up in the middle of the night. The way I tense up when someone raises their voice. Judge Quelith's expression softened even further. Michael continued. I came home from Afghanistan with more than scars, Your Honor. I came home with memories I can't turn off. I came home with instincts that don't belong in a quiet neighborhood. And I came home to a daughter who lost her mother when she was 3 and needs her father to be present, not haunted. He looked down at his hands. The firearm in my vehicle isn't there because I'm a threat. It's there because I don't always feel safe. And I know that's hard for people to understand. But it's the truth. The room was completely still. Even Hicks had stopped shuffling his papers. Michael looked back up at Judge Quelith. I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor. I'm just asking to be seen. Not as a case file. Not as a defendant. But as a person. Judge Quelith blinked hard. Her throat tightened, and she had to look away for a moment to compose herself. When she looked back, her voice was quieter. Thank you, Mr. Miller. I appreciate your honesty. She turned to Hicks. Mr. Hicks, does the state have any rebuttal? Hicks stood, but he didn't approach the bench. He simply said, No, Your Honor. Judge Quelith nodded. Very well. I'm going to take a short recess to review the remaining evidence. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. She stood, and the bailiff called out again. All rise. As Judge Quelith walked toward her chambers, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not doubt, exactly. But wait. The kind that comes when you realize the person in front of you isn't just a name on a docket, but a human being carrying more than the law could ever measure. She closed the door to her chambers and sat down at her desk. The folder with Michael's service record was still there. She opened it again and looked at the photograph. A younger version of Michael in full dress uniform, standing at attention. The silver star pinned to his chest. She thought about her own career. The cases she'd won. The precedents she'd cited. The respect she'd earned. And then she thought about the look on Michael's face when she'd mocked him. She had been wrong. Deeply, profoundly wrong, and for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure how to make it right. Back in the courtroom, Michael sat quietly. Lily's school photo was tucked into his jacket pocket, a small anchor in the storm. He thought about what he would tell her tonight. How he would explain why Daddy had to go to court. How he would make her understand that sometimes the world was unfair, but you still had to stand up and tell the truth. A few rows back, the young woman who had thanked him earlier whispered to her friend, He's not just fighting for himself. He's fighting for all of them. Her friend nodded. I know. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't just a place of judgment anymore. It was a place of reckoning. When Judge Quelith returned to the bench, the courtroom felt different. The earlier mockery had been replaced by a quiet attentiveness. The kind that comes when people realize they're witnessing something more than just a legal proceeding. They were watching a man reclaim his dignity, one careful word at a time. Judge Quelith sat down, adjusted her microphone, and looked directly at Michael. Her expression was composed, but there was something softer in her eyes now. Something almost vulnerable. Mr. Miller, she began, I've reviewed the documentation regarding your firearm permit. The state of Oregon shows that your permit was issued on February 12, 2023, and remains valid through February 2026. The database error that Officer Booker encountered appears to have been a result of the system migration Mr. Hicks mentioned earlier. She paused. Given that the permit is valid and that you were cooperative during the stop, I'm inclined to dismiss the charge related to unlawful possession. However, before I make that ruling, I'd like to hear from you one more time. Michael stood. Your Honor, I don't have much more to say. I followed the law. I obtained the proper permits. I keep the firearm secured and unloaded in my vehicle. I've never used it. I've never threatened anyone with it. It's simply there because I feel safer knowing it's there. Judge Quelith nodded. And your daughter, Lily, does she know you carry a firearm? Michael shook his head. No, Your Honor. I keep it locked in a case, and I never bring it into the house. She doesn't need to know about it. Not yet. Why not? Michael's jaw tightened. Because I don't want her growing up afraid. I don't want her to see the world the way I sometimes have to. She deserves to feel safe without needing a reason. Judge Queleth looked down at her notes, then back up. Mr. Miller, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you think the system failed you today? Michael considered the question carefully. I think the system is made up of people, Your Honor, and people make mistakes. Some of those mistakes come from ignorance. Some come from bias. And some come from just not taking the time to listen. He glanced at Gerald Hicks, then back at the judge. But I also think the system can correct itself. That's why I'm here. Not to fight. Not to prove anyone wrong. Just to make sure the truth gets heard. Just to make sure the truth gets heard. Judge Queleth's chest tightened. She had spent years believing that justice was about applying the law correctly, following precedent, maintaining order. But Michael had just reminded her of something she'd forgotten. Justice was also about listening. She turned to Hicks. Mr. Hicks, does the state have any objection to dismissing the firearm charge? Hicks stood slowly. He looked at his notes, then at Michael, then back at the judge. No, Your Honor. Given the evidence, the state has no objection. Judge Queleth nodded. Then the charge of unlawful possession of a firearm is hereby dismissed. A quiet wave of relief passed through the gallery. Someone in the back whispered, "Finally." But Judge Queleth wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice clear and deliberate. Mr. Miller, I want to say something, and I want everyone in this courtroom to hear it. The room fell silent. When you walked in here today, I judged you. I saw a man without a lawyer, wearing a medal I didn't believe was real, and I made assumptions. I thought you were trying to manipulate this court. I thought you were using your service as a shield. Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. I was wrong. And not just wrong in my assumptions, but wrong in my approach. I failed to give you the presumption of dignity that every person deserves when they stand before this bench. She looked directly at him. You served this country with honor. You sacrificed more than most of us can imagine. And instead of being met with respect, you were met with skepticism and condescension. That is unacceptable. And I take full responsibility for it. Michael stood still, his expression unreadable. Judge Queleth continued. This court exists to serve justice. But justice without compassion is just procedure. And today, I was reminded that the people who come before me aren't just case files. They're human beings with stories, with struggles, with sacrifices. She glanced down at the silver star still pinned to Michael's chest. That medal you wear represents valor. It represents courage under fire. And today, you showed that same courage, not on a battlefield, but in this courtroom. You stood your ground. You told your truth. And you did it with grace. Her voice softened. Thank you for that. And thank you for your service. Michael's throat tightened. He nodded once, unable to speak. Judge Queleth straightened. All charges against Michael James Miller are hereby dismissed. You are free to go. The gavel fell, but instead of the usual sharp crack, it sounded almost gentle. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Not loud or chaotic, just a steady, respectful acknowledgement. People stood. Some clapped. Others simply nodded. The older man in the navy cap saluted. Michael stood there for a moment, letting it all wash over him. Then he picked up his duffel bag, slung it over his shoulder, and turned toward the exit. But before he reached the door, Judge Queleth's voice stopped him. Mr. Miller. He turned back. She had stepped down from the bench and was walking toward him. No robe now, just a woman in a simple blouse and slacks. She stopped a few feet away. I meant what I said. she told him quietly. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry." Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. She took it. And they shook, not as judge and defendant, but as two people who had both learned something that day. "Thank you." "Your Honor," Michael said. "Nadira," she corrected softly. "Call me Nadira." He nodded. "Thank you, Nadira." She released his hand but didn't step back. "If you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out." Michael gave a small smile. "I appreciate that." He turned and walked toward the door. As he pushed it open, sunlight flooded the courtroom. Bright and warm, and for the first time in a long time, Michael Miller felt like he could breathe. Behind him, Nadira Queleth stood in the center of the courtroom, watching him go. She had presided over hundreds of cases. She had handed down sentences, dismissed charges, upheld laws. But today, she had learned something more important than any legal precedent. She had learned to see and as the courtroom slowly emptied, she walked back to her chambers, sat down at her desk, and pulled out a piece of paper at the top. She wrote, "What does justice really mean?" And then, for the first time in years, she didn't have an answer, but she was ready to find one. Michael Miller stood on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun warm on his face. The weight he'd carried into that building, heavy and suffocating, had lifted. Not completely. There were some burdens that never fully disappeared, but enough that he could stand straighter, breathe deeper. He pulled his phone from his pocket and checked the time. 3:47 p.m. Lily would be getting out of school soon. He'd promised to pick her up today. Promised they'd get ice cream and talk about her day. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of things that mattered more than medals or courtrooms or anything else. He started down the steps, but a voice called out behind him. "Mr. Miller, wait." He turned. It was Nadira Queleth, no longer in her robe, moving quickly down the steps with a folder tucked under her arm. She looked different outside the courtroom, less imposing, more human. "I'm sorry," she said, slightly out of breath. "I know you probably just want to leave, but there's something I need to ask you." Michael waited. She glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "That medal. The Silver Star. I read the citation, but citations are always so clinical, so stripped down. They don't tell you what it really means." She met his eyes. "What happened that day? Really happened?" Michael looked away, toward the street where cars passed by in their ordinary rhythms. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, almost distant, as if he were pulling the words from somewhere deep and locked away. "It was November 9th, 2011, he began. "We were on patrol in Helmand Province, moving through a village that intelligence said was clear. It wasn't." Nadira listened, not interrupting, barely breathing. "We got hit from 3 sides. RPGs, small arms fire, everything. My squad scattered for cover. I made it behind a low wall with 2 other Marines. But 3 of our guys were pinned down in the open, maybe 50 meters away. No cover, just dirt and bullets." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Our squad leader, Sergeant Torres, he tried to move toward them. Got hit in the leg before he made it 10 feet. Went down hard. The other 2, Corporal Davis and Private First Class Chun, they were trapped. Couldn't move forward, couldn't fall back." Nadira's throat tightened. She could see it in his eyes now, the memory playing out like a film he couldn't stop. "I didn't think," Michael said. "I just moved. Grabbed my rifle and ran. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just remember running, and the sound, the sound of rounds hitting the dirt around me, like hail on a tin roof." His voice dropped even lower. "I got to Torres first. Dragged him back behind cover. He was bleeding bad, screaming at me not to go back out. But I did. Ran back out for Davis. Got him halfway back when I felt something hit my shoulder. Didn't realize I'd been hit until I saw the blood. Nadira's hand went to her mouth. Got Davis back. Then I went for Chun. Michael's voice broke slightly. But Chun was already gone. I knew it the second I reached him. But I couldn't leave him there. I couldn't. He closed his eyes. I carried him back. Took 2 more hits, one in the leg, one that grazed my ribs. Made it behind the wall just as air support came in. Torres and Davis both survived. Chun didn't, but at least his family got to bury him. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. That's what the medal is for. Not for being a hero. For doing what anyone would have done. For not leaving your brothers behind. Nadira felt tears streaming down her own face. She didn't try to hide them. Michael, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. No one does, he said softly. That's the thing about valor, Nadira. It's not something you talk about. It's something you carry. She wiped her eyes, struggling to compose herself. And you've been carrying it all this time, alone. Not alone, he said. I have Lily. She's the reason I'm still here. Nadira nodded slowly, then looked down at the folder in her hands. I need to tell you something too. Something I haven't told anyone in this courthouse. Michael waited. She took a breath. My brother was in the army, Captain James Quelliff. He served in Iraq during the surge in 2007. Michael's expression shifted. Was? Nadira's voice trembled. He was killed by an IED outside Ramadi. He was 28 years old. Michael's face softened with immediate understanding. I'm sorry. I was in law school when it happened, she continued. I thought about dropping out, thought about enlisting myself, but my parents begged me not to. They'd already lost one child to the war. They couldn't lose another. She looked up at him. So I stayed. I finished school. I became a prosecutor, then a judge. And I told myself I was serving justice, honoring James by upholding the law. Her voice cracked. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what justice really means. I forgot that the law is supposed to serve people, not the other way around. I became so focused on procedure, on precedent, on maintaining order, that I stopped seeing the people in front of me. She shook her head. And today, when you walked into my courtroom wearing that medal, I didn't see a hero. I didn't see someone who'd sacrificed everything. I saw a problem. A disruption. Someone who didn't fit into my neat, orderly system. Tears streamed down her face again. And I'm ashamed of that. Because James would have been ashamed of me. Because James would have been ashamed of me. Michael reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Your brother would have been proud of you, Nadira. You did the right thing today. You listened. You learned. That takes courage, too. She looked up at him, her eyes red but searching. How do you do it? How do you carry all that pain and still show up every day for your daughter with a smile? Michael was quiet for a moment. Because she's my mission now. Torres and Davis, they made it home because I didn't give up. And Lily, she's going to make it through this life because I won't give up on her either. That's what keeps me going. Nadira nodded slowly, understanding settling over her like a weight and a relief all at once. You're not just a veteran, Michael. You're still serving. We all are, he said. Just in different ways. They stood there on the courthouse steps, two people who had started the day as adversaries and ended it as something else. Not quite friends, not yet, but something deeper. Two souls who understood loss, sacrifice, and the quiet courage it took to keep moving forward. Nadira wiped her eyes one more time and straightened her posture. I meant what I said in there. If you ever need anything, please reach out. Michael nodded. I will. And Nadira? Yes, thank you. For listening. For changing your mind. That's rarer than you think. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the practiced courtroom version. Maybe we both learned something today. Maybe we did. As Michael turned to leave, Nadira called out one more time. Michael? He looked back. Your daughter, Lily. She's lucky to have you. Michael's expression softened. I'm the lucky one. He walked down the remaining steps and onto the sidewalk, heading toward his truck parked 2 blocks away. Behind him, Nadira stood watching until he disappeared around the corner. Then she looked down at the folder in her hands. Inside was a photograph she'd brought from home that morning, one she kept in her desk drawer but rarely looked at. It was a picture of her brother James in his army uniform, standing tall and proud, his smile bright and full of life. She traced her finger along the edge of the photo. I see them now, James, she whispered. I promise I see them. A breeze moved through the trees lining the courthouse steps, rustling the leaves with a sound like distant applause. Nadira took a deep breath, tucked the folder back under her arm, and walked back inside. She had cases to review, rulings to reconsider, and a whole new perspective on what it meant to serve justice. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was finally doing it right. Michael pulled into the parking lot of Brookside Elementary School at exactly 3:58 p.m. The bell hadn't rung yet, but parents were already lining up in their cars, engines idling, eyes on the front doors. He parked toward the back, away from the rush, and waited. His shoulder ached where the old shrapnel wound sometimes flared up, especially after stress. He rolled it slowly, wincing slightly, then reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small bottle of ibuprofen. He dry swallowed 2 pills and leaned back against the headrest. The metal was still pinned to his jacket. He looked down at it, running his thumb over the raised silver star. He thought about taking it off, putting it away, tucking it back into the box where it usually lived. But something made him leave it there. Not pride, not defiance, just acceptance. The bell rang. Within seconds, the front doors burst open and a flood of youngsters poured out, backpacks bouncing, voices chattering, a chaotic wave of energy and youth. Michael scanned the crowd, and then he saw her. Lily. She was near the middle of the pack. Her brown hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail. Her pink backpack covered in space-themed patches, rockets, planets, stars. She was talking animatedly to another girl, her hands moving in big gestures, probably explaining some new fact she'd learned about black holes or the Mars rover. Michael smiled. That was his girl. Curious, bright, unstoppable. She spotted his truck and her whole face lit up. She broke away from her friend and ran toward him, backpack bouncing wildly. Michael got out and crouched down just in time to catch her in a hug. Daddy! She squealed, wrapping her arms around his neck. Hey kiddo, he said, lifting her slightly off the ground. Miss me? Always, she said, pulling back to look at him. Then her eyes dropped to the metal on his chest. Her brow furrowed. What's that? Michael set her down gently. It's something I got a long time ago. Before you were born. Is it like a trophy? Sort of. It's for something I did in the Marines. Lily tilted her head, studying it closely. Did you save someone? Michael hesitated. He'd never told her the full story. He'd never wanted to burden her with the weight of war, the reality of what he'd seen and done. But as he looked into her wide, trusting eyes, he realized she deserved to know. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Yeah, he said softly. I helped some friends when they were in trouble. Were you scared? He nodded, terrified. But you did it anyway? I did. Lily looked up at him with an expression far too wise for a 9-year-old. That's what makes you brave, Daddy. Being scared and doing it anyway. Michael's throat tightened. He pulled her into another hug, holding her close. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, she said matter-of-factly. You just didn't notice. He laughed, a real, full laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Fair enough. Come on, let's get that ice cream I promised you. They climbed into the truck and Michael started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Lily chattered about her day. About the science experiment they'd done with vinegar and baking soda. About how her friend Emma had accidentally launched her volcano across the classroom. About how the teacher had laughed instead of getting mad. Michael listened. Really listened, letting her voice wash over him like a balm. This was what mattered. Not courtrooms or medals or proving himself to strangers. This, her, the sound of her laughter. The way she said "daddy" like it was the safest word in the world. They stopped at a small ice cream shop called Scoop Dreams, a local place with hand-painted murals of waffle cones and smiling suns. Lily ordered her usual mint chocolate chip with gummy bears on top, a combination that made Michael's stomach turn but made her eyes light up. He got plain vanilla. They sat outside at a small metal table, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Lily swung her legs under the table, attacking her ice cream with the focus of a surgeon. "Daddy?" she said between bites. "Yeah? Why did you have to go to court today?" Michael paused, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He'd hoped she wouldn't ask, but of course she would. Lily asked about everything. "Someone thought I did something wrong," he said carefully. "But I didn't, so I had to explain that to a judge." "Did she believe you?" "Eventually." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Good, because you don't lie." "No, I don't." "And you're a good person." Michael's chest ached. "I try to be, kiddo." Lily looked at him seriously, ice cream forgotten for a moment. "Mommy would be proud of you." The words hit him like a punch. He set his spoon down and looked away, blinking hard. He hadn't expected that. He never expected it when Lily brought up her mother, but she did sometimes, in these quiet, piercing moments that left him breathless. "You think so?" He managed. "I know so," Lily said confidently. "She told me." Michael's head snapped back toward her. "What?" Lily shrugged, returning to her ice cream. "I talk to her sometimes. At night, before I go to sleep. I tell her about school and stuff. And sometimes I feel like she answers. Not with words, but like, I just know what she'd say." Michael stared at his daughter, this small, impossibly wise person who had lost her mother before she could even remember her, and yet somehow still carried her presence like a light. "What does she say?" he asked quietly. Lily tilted her head, thinking. "She says you're doing a good job. That I'm lucky to have you. And that she's not really gone. She's just in a different place, watching us." Tears spilled down Michael's cheeks before he could stop them. He didn't wipe them away. He just let them fall. Lily reached across the table and took his hand. "It's okay to cry, Daddy. Mrs. Parker says crying means you have feelings, and feelings are good." Michael laughed through his tears. "Mrs. Parker sounds pretty smart." "She is. She's my teacher." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Lily. More than anything in the world." "I love you too, Daddy." They sat there for a while longer, finishing their ice cream in comfortable silence. Around them, the world moved on, people walking by, cars passing, the sun inching lower in the sky. But in that moment, at that small metal table outside Scoop Dreams, Michael Miller felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. When they finally got back in the truck, Lily asked if they could listen to her favorite song. Some pop tune about stars and dreams that she'd been obsessed with for weeks. Michael turned it on, and she sang along loudly and off-key. Her joy so pure and unfiltered, it made his heart ache in the best way. As he drove them home. Past familiar streets and neighborhoods, past the courthouse where he'd stood that morning feeling small and judged. He realized something. He hadn't needed the courtroom to validate him. He hadn't needed the judge's apology or the prosecutor's dismissal, or even William Traverse walking through those doors. What he'd needed was already sitting beside him, singing at the top of her lungs, covered in ice cream stains. Completely and utterly his. That was his mission now. That was his purpose. Not the battlefield. Not the medal. Not the past, her. The medal. Not the past, her. And as long as he had her, as long as she looked at him with those trusting eyes and called him Daddy, he knew he'd be okay. They both would be. When they pulled into the driveway of their small house, Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to him. "Can we have pancakes for dinner?" Michael smiled. "Absolutely. With chocolate chips? Is there any other way?" She grinned and jumped out of the truck, running toward the front door. Michael followed more slowly, his body tired, but his heart lighter than it had been in months. As he unlocked the door and stepped inside, he looked back once more at the medal still pinned to his jacket. Then he carefully unpinned it, walked to the small shelf in the hallway where a framed photo of his late wife sat, and placed the medal beside it. "We're okay," he whispered. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. 3 days had passed since the courtroom. 3 quiet, ordinary days filled with pancakes and homework, bedtime stories and morning cartoons. Michael had gone back to his job at Henderson's Auto Repair, turning wrenches and changing oil, letting the rhythm of simple work settle his mind. Lily had gone back to school, come home with stories about fractions and recess, and fallen asleep each night clutching her stuffed astronaut bear. Life had returned to normal. Or so Michael thought. It was Friday afternoon when his phone rang. He was under a Toyota Camry, replacing a worn serpentine belt, his hands covered in grease. He almost didn't answer, but something made him slide out from under the car and wipe his hands on a rag. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Mr. Miller? This is Nadira Quelith." He straightened. "Judge Quelith. I mean Nadira, hi." There was a pause, then her voice came through, warmer than he remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting your day." "Not at all. I'm just at work." "Is everything okay?" "Yes, everything's fine. Actually, better than fine. I'm calling because something happened this morning. Something I thought you should know about." Michael's pulse quickened. "What happened?" "I received a call from the State Attorney General's office. They've been reviewing cases across the district, looking for patterns of procedural errors, and your case came up. Specifically, the email system failure that caused your bench warrant." Michael leaned against the workbench. "Okay, Michael, your case wasn't the only one. There were 47 other instances where court notifications were lost during that system migration. 47 people who missed hearings they'd properly notified the court about. 47 bench warrants that should never have been issued." His breath caught. 47. "Yes, and because of what happened in your hearing, because of the documentation you provided and the attention your case received, the Attorney General's office has launched a full review. They're working to overturn every wrongful warrant and expunge the records." Michael didn't know what to say. He just stood there, phone pressed to his ear, trying to process what he was hearing. Nadira continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Michael, you did this. By standing up for yourself, by refusing to accept injustice, you helped 46 other people who didn't even know they needed help." "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "I just told the truth." "That's exactly what you did. And sometimes that's everything." There was a long pause. Then Nadira spoke again, softer now. "There's something else. The Attorney General wants to meet with you. They're putting together a task force to review systemic issues in the court system, and they want your input. They want to hear your perspective." Michael's mind spun. "My perspective? I'm just a mechanic. I'm not a lawyer. You're someone who lived through the failure of the system and found a way to fix it. That makes you exactly the kind of person they need." He rubbed his face with his free hand, smearing a bit of grease on his cheek without realizing it. "I don't know, Nadira. I'm not good with all that official stuff. I just want to take care of my daughter. I understand. And I told them you might say that." But Michael, think about it. How many other veterans are out there right now, struggling with PTSD, dealing with the VA, trying to navigate systems that weren't built with them in mind? How many of them don't have the knowledge or the courage to stand up the way you did? Her voice grew more urgent. You have a chance to make a real difference. Not just for yourself, not just for those 47 people, but for everyone who comes after you. Michael closed his eyes. He thought about Torres and Davis, about the men he'd carried out of that firefight. He thought about Chun, whose body he'd refused to leave behind. He thought about every Marine he'd served with, every veteran he'd met at the VA who looked tired and defeated, ground down by bureaucracy and indifference. And he thought about Lily, growing up in a world that might be just a little bit better if someone stood up and tried to fix it. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll meet with them." He could hear the smile in Nadira's voice. "Thank you, Michael. I'll send you the details. The meeting is next Tuesday at the State Capitol building in Salem. I'll be there. And Michael? I'll be there too. You won't be alone in this." Something warm spread through his chest. "Thank you, Nadira. For everything. No, thank you." After he hung up, Michael stood in the garage for a long moment, staring at the phone in his hand. Around him, the familiar sounds of the shop continued. The hiss of air compressors, the clang of tools, the low murmur of a radio playing classic rock. His coworker, Danny, a stocky man in his 50s with permanent oil stains on his coveralls, walked over. "Everything okay, Miller?" Michael looked up. "Yeah, actually, I think it might be." Danny raised an eyebrow. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Not a ghost," Michael said slowly. "More like a door I didn't know was there." Danny clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, whatever it is, good for you, man. You deserve some good news." Michael nodded and returned to the Camry, sliding back under the chassis. But as he worked, his mind was elsewhere. Already thinking about what he would say at that meeting, about how he could help, about what doors might open if he just kept walking through them. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop. He Googled the state attorney general's office, read about the task force Nadira had mentioned, and felt a flutter of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging kind, but the quiet, steady kind that came from knowing you could make a difference, even a small one. He opened a new document and started writing. Not a speech, not a formal statement, just his thoughts. About what it felt like to navigate the VA system. About the challenges veterans faced when transitioning back to civilian life. About the gaps in the system that left good people falling through the cracks. He wrote for 2 hours, the words pouring out faster than he could type. When he finally stopped, he had 5 pages of raw, honest testimony about what it meant to come home from war and try to build a normal life. He saved the document, closed the laptop, and sat back in his chair. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't care. For the first time since hanging up his uniform, he felt like he had a mission again. Not a military mission. Something different. Something that mattered just as much. The weekend passed in a blur. Michael told Lily about the meeting, and her eyes had gone wide with excitement. "You're going to help people, Daddy. Like a superhero?" He'd laughed. "Not exactly like a superhero." "Close enough," she declared, and that was that. On Monday night, he laid out his clothes for the next day. Not his work coveralls, but a pair of clean slacks and a button-down shirt. He considered wearing the silver star again, then decided against it. This wasn't about proving who he was. This was about helping others. He slept better that night than he had in months. Tuesday morning arrived clear and bright. Michael dropped Lily at school, promising he'd be home in time for dinner. Then drove the 2 hours to Salem. The state capitol building was impressive. All marble columns and tall windows. The kind of place that made you feel small and significant at the same time. He found the meeting room on the 3rd floor. Nadira was already there, standing near the window in a sharp gray suit, talking quietly with a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. When she saw Michael, her face broke into a genuine smile. "Michael, I'm so glad you came." She introduced him to the man, Howard Preston, the state attorney general, who shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, it's an honor. Judge Queleth has told me about your case, and I have to say, what you did took real courage." Michael shook his head. "I just did what needed to be done." "Exactly," Preston said. "And that's why we need you here." Over the next 3 hours, Michael sat at a table with a dozen other people, lawyers, judges, veterans advocates, policy experts, and told his story. He talked about the courtroom, about the email that got lost, about the firearm stop that should never have happened. He talked about the VA, about PTSD, about the invisible barriers that made it hard for veterans to ask for help. And people listened. Really listened. They took notes. They asked questions. They thanked him for his honesty. When the meeting finally ended, Preston shook his hand again. "Mr. Miller, we're going to use your testimony to draft new policies. Better notification systems. Better training for law enforcement. Better coordination with the VA. This is just the beginning, but it's an important beginning. And it wouldn't be happening without you. And it wouldn't be happening without you." Michael felt a lump in his throat. "I hope it helps." "It will," Preston said firmly. "I promise you, it will." As Michael walked out of the building with Nadira beside him, the afternoon sun warm on his face, he felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd been carrying, the burden of the past, it was still there. It always would be. But it felt lighter now, shared. "Thank you for believing in me," he said to Nadira. She stopped and turned to face him. "Michael, I didn't believe in you at first. But you made me believe. You showed me what real courage looks like. And I'll never forget that." They stood there for a moment, two people who had started as adversaries and become something more. Allies, friends. "What will you do now?" she asked out. Michael smiled. "I'm going to go home. Make dinner for my daughter. Help her with her homework. Live my life. That sounds perfect." He nodded. "It is." As he drove home, the highway stretching out before him, Michael thought about everything that had happened. The courtroom. The dismissal. The meeting. The change. And he realized something. He'd won. Not just the case. Not just his freedom. He'd won his life back. And that was worth more than any medal. 6 months later, autumn had settled over Oregon with a blanket of gold and crimson leaves. The air carried that particular Christmas that made people pull out sweaters and think about hot cider and bonfires. Life had continued its steady rhythm for Michael Miller, but it was a different rhythm now. Richer somehow. More purposeful. The changes hadn't been dramatic or sudden. They'd come in small waves, gentle but persistent. Like tide reshaping a shoreline. The task force had met 4 more times. Since that first meeting in Salem, Michael had attended each one. Driving up early in the morning and returning home in time to tuck Lily into bed. The policies they'd discussed were slowly taking shape, working their way through the bureaucratic channels. Court notification systems were being overhauled. Law enforcement was receiving better training on working with veterans. The VA was coordinating more closely with local courts to prevent situations like Michael's from happening again. It was slow work. Sometimes frustratingly so. But it was real work. Work that mattered. Michael had also started volunteering at the local Veterans Service Center 2 evenings a week. He helped other vets navigate the system, fill out paperwork, understand their benefits. He shared his story, not to boast, but to show others that it was possible to stand up for yourself, even when the system felt overwhelming. Some of the men and women who came through those doors were angry. Some were defeated. Some were just tired. But Michael met each one with the same quiet patience he'd shown in that courtroom. And slowly, He watched them find their footing again. It reminded him why he'd joined the Marines in the first place. Not for the medals or the glory, but for the sense of purpose that came from serving something larger than yourself. On a Saturday in late October, Michael and Lily drove to the coast. It had become their tradition, these weekend trips to the ocean, just the two of them. They'd walk along the beach, collect shells, eat fish and chips from a small shack that overlooked the water, and talk about everything and nothing. Today, the beach was mostly empty, the tourists gone for the season, leaving only locals and the occasional dedicated beachcomber. The waves crashed against the shore in their ancient rhythm, and seagulls wheeled overhead, calling to each other in sharp, bright voices. Lily ran ahead, her jacket flapping in the wind, chasing the retreating waves and squealing when they rushed back toward her. Michael followed more slowly, his hands in his pockets, a smile on his face. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out and saw a text from Nadira. "Thinking about you both today. Hope you're having a good weekend." Over the past 6 months, they'd stayed in touch. Not constantly, but regularly. Coffee once a month. Phone calls when one of them needed to talk. It had started as professional courtesy, then shifted into something more like friendship. And maybe, just maybe, the early whispers of something beyond that. Michael texted back. "At the beach with Lily, it's beautiful. Hope you're well." The response came quickly. "I'm jealous. Stuck in my office with a mountain of case files. But wouldn't trade it for anything. This job means something again." Michael smiled. He understood that feeling completely. He pocketed his phone and called out to Lily. "Hey kiddo, wanna grab some lunch?" She ran back to him, breathless and grinning, her cheeks pink from the wind. "Can we get clam chowder? Is that even a question?" They walked to the fish shack, ordered their food, and sat at a weathered picnic table overlooking the ocean. Lily attacked her chowder with enthusiasm while Michael picked at his fish and chips. Content to watch her and listen to her chatter about school, about the book she was reading, about her plan to build a model rocket for the science fair. "Daddy?" she said suddenly, looking up from her bowl. "Yeah? Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He set down his fork and looked at her, really looked at her. Her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, were serious and searching. "Yeah, kiddo," he said softly. "I am, are you?" She nodded firmly. "Very, I like it when you smile more. You didn't used to smile as much." Michael's throat tightened. He reached across the table and ruffled her hair. "Well, I've got a lot to smile about these days." "Like what?" "Like you. And like knowing that the work I'm doing might help other people. And like, I don't know, just feeling like things are moving in the right direction." Lily considered this, then nodded sagely. "That's good, Daddy. Mommy would be happy too." "Yeah," Michael said, his voice thick. "She would be." They finished their lunch in comfortable silence, then walked back down to the beach. This time, Michael took off his shoes and rolled up his pant legs. Wading into the shallow water beside Lily, the cold shocked his feet. But it felt good. Grounding. As they walked, Lily slipped her small hand into his. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Always. That lady who calls you sometimes. Miss Nadira. Is she your friend?" Michael glanced down at her, surprised. "Yeah, she's my friend. Why do you ask?" Lily shrugged. "I just wondered. You sound happy when you talk to her. Do I?" It's okay if you like her, you know. I wouldn't mind." Michael stopped walking. He crouched down to Lily's level, looking her in the eye. "Lily, I need you to understand something. Nobody, and I mean nobody, will ever replace your mom. She was the love of my life, and she always will be." Lily nodded seriously. "I know that, Daddy. But," Michael continued carefully, "that doesn't mean I can't have other people in my life who are important to me. Does that make sense? Like how I love you the most, But I also love Grandma and Mrs. Parker and Emma. Michael smiled. Exactly like that. Lily grinned. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Because Miss Nadira seems nice, and I think you should have more friends. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, she said, echoing her earlier declaration. You just keep forgetting. Michael laughed and stood up, taking her hand again. They continued their walk, and as they moved along the shoreline, Michael felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him, for this moment. For his daughter. For the second chance he'd been given to build a life that mattered. That evening, after they'd driven home and Lily had fallen asleep in the truck, Michael carried her inside and tucked her into bed. He stood in her doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, her stuffed astronaut bear clutched in her arms, her face peaceful and content. Then he walked to the living room and sat down on the couch. He pulled out his phone and looked at Nadira's text again. He hesitated, then typed a new message. Lily asked about you today. Asked if you were my friend. I told her yes. But I've been thinking, and I'd like you to meet her properly. Maybe dinner sometime? No pressure. Just thought it might be nice. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came 5 minutes later. I would love that, Michael. More than you know. Michael smiled and set the phone down. He leaned back against the couch and closed his eyes. Feeling something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Real. Tangible hope for the future. Not hope that the pain would disappear. He knew better than that. But hope that the pain could coexist with joy. That loss could coexist with love. That the past could inform the future without defining it. He thought about the courtroom 6 months ago. About standing alone at that defendant's table, mocked and dismissed. He thought about William Traverse walking through those doors. About Nadira's apology. About the medal pinned to his chest. But mostly, he thought about what came after. The real work. The slow, unglamorous work of showing up, telling the truth, and helping others do the same. Asterisk, that was the real victory. Not the dismissal of charges. Not the vindication. But the choice to keep moving forward, to keep serving, to keep believing that one person could make a difference. He opened his eyes and looked around. The small living room of his modest house. The framed photo of his wife on the shelf. The drawings Lily had taped to the wall. The silver star resting beside a participation trophy from her soccer league. This was his life. Imperfect, complicated, beautiful. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Outside. The October wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of winter and the distant hope of spring. Michael stood, turned off the lights, and walked to his bedroom. Turned off the lights, and walked to his bedroom. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own joys, its own moments of doubt and triumph, but tonight, Michael Miller went to bed with a clear conscience and a grateful heart, and for a man who had once carried wounded brothers across a battlefield, who had stood alone in a courtroom and refused to back down, who had chosen his daughter over his career and never once regretted it. That was the greatest victory of all. The story didn't end with a dramatic courtroom scene or a tearful reunion or a sweeping romantic gesture. It ended the way all good stories should, with a quiet, ordinary evening, a sleeping daughter down the hall, and a man who had finally found his way home, not to a place, but to himself. And that was more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.